About a year and a half when I was working at Digital, one of my coworkers, his name was Steve Savignano, came to talk to me. He wanted to tell me that I was actually in some kind of trouble, that my job was actually, if things didn't change, could well be in jeopardy. I needed to change how I was acting. Now, the problem was I thought I was doing okay. I was doing exactly, in a sense, what I thought I had been told to do. And how I reacted to what he had to say to me was really going to be important in whether, well, I ended up keeping my job or not. Now, I could have easily taken the route of blaming my supervisor for not letting me know. That would have been a very easy thing to do, that it was all that person's fault. If they had told me, I simply would have done something differently and things would have been better. But the reality is, I'm an adult, and I am ultimately responsible for my own choices. And I really was responsible for really trying to understand the lay of the land honestly better than I did. I really appreciated what Steve did for me that day. He didn't have to. But he helped me to see that I needed to change. And so really I had two choices. I could look at the situation from fear of what's going to happen to me. And let's be really honest that many times when we act out of fear, it can either paralyze us or it can cause us to do things that, well, aren't good. Or I could have looked at it, and the way I did, honestly, was with a sense of positivity. All right, I need to change. What do I need to do differently? I had that conversation with Steve after I thought a little bit more about sort of what I had been doing as opposed to what I could be doing, and then sort of get insight from him. How do I step up? How do I make the changes I need to make? He knew the team better than I. He had been there longer than me, and so knew the team better than I did, really. And that's exactly what happened. I became an integral part moving forward of putting the product out and what needed to happen. Things really did change. Herod gets some news. And it's news that troubles him and, as we hear, all of Jerusalem. Well, if you know anything about the history of Herod, you'd understand why. He was not the most gracious person in the world. Let's just say it was not good to be one of Herod's sons. Herod is one of these people who needs to be in complete control of the situation. And yet this news that is brought to him clearly takes that control out of his hands. And so Herod does some good things, much like I did. He started gathering information, trying to determine exactly what is happening, what this news means. And from that, again, like me, he created an action plan. Let's just say his action plan went on the more negative side of things. Because ultimately, Herod would come to act out of fear. He was afraid of losing his throne. He was afraid of losing his power, his authority, and all that went with that. And in that fear, his action plan would be one of utter brutality. And that's the problem when we choose to act out of fear. Then we have the Magi. The Magi recognize this star for what it is. They go through all the books and they gather as much information as they can, but it only gets them so far. And they stop to gather more information to help sort of solidify their action plan for how they're going to move forward. The difference between the Magi and Herod is that they are acting out of hope, out of faith in the promises that this is intended to instill. They are open to responding to God. Where Herod wants to prevent what God has said is going to happen from happening. So, what does this mean for us? Ultimately, we need to recognize that God is acting in our life and to recognize how He is acting in our life. Because He is. You exist. That tells me all I need to know about whether God is acting in your life or not. Once we understand that truth and that reality, then we have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do? Are we going to act out of fear? Or are we going to act out of hope and faith? Because ultimately, those are our two choices in how we're going to live life. We're either going to live life in fear of what might be, of what might come, of what the possibilities might be. That life of Herod. Or we're going to live that life of the Magi, that life of faith, that life of hope and wonder. Of willing to go forward without having all of the answers to our action plan. And trusting that God will provide what we need as we go. But we do need an action plan to start. The Magi, they looked to the star, they read what they needed to read, and they started following. But they were willing to change when things weren't exactly the way they anticipated, when they sort of got lost a little bit. And with that, they simply stopped to look at sort of what the next step is. Where was God calling them to go? How was God calling them to go? So, the question for us, what is our action plan going to be? What are we going to choose to do? How are we going to choose to react to what is happening in our life, to how God is leading us in our life? Will we take the way of Herod, the way of fear? Or will we follow the star? Will we follow the way of the Magi? And live a life in faith?